Hello, dear friends from Holly Hall. I'm Charlotte Etchen here welcoming you back to our new season of book reviews. You know, it's so nice to be back with you again after all these months of seclusion. We've missed you and hope you and yours have stayed well. Now, I, for one, cannot believe all the computer skills I have been asked to adopt ever since we've been in this season of COVID-19. For instance, I'd never heard the word Zoom before. You know, I don't know about you folks, but old age is coming at a really bad time for me. You know, all this white and silver hair. Maybe we should call it wisdom highlights. That's a good one. We'll think about that one. However, with all this wonderful assistance and technology that we have today, wow, we're able to come together once again and to hear our book reviews through technology. What a special treat that is. Now, I pray that you have your calendar of reviewers ready and it's been all put together for you. For instance, let's answering what and when are the reviews. Just substitute a T for the W and we can answer that for you. The first one airing today, of course, is October 20th, 10:30 a.m. with our dearest Rosemary Rumbley, reviewing the Roaring Twenties. Wow, can't wait to hear about that. Got to be better than the 20s we're in. And the next one is November 5th, a Thursday, at 10:30 a.m. with Duchess Goldblatt. She's reviewing her book, Becoming a Duchess. We all got to learn how to do that. The next one is Thursday, February 18th, with Ann Wiesberger, reviewing her book, The Glove Maker. You don't want to miss that one. She's a well-known Houston reviewer. And the March date, well, we're going to have to announce that to you in a little while. You know, Catherine Center was supposed to work with us last year. Unfortunately, the COVID hit. We had to call off the book reviews. But we're looking forward to having her again. She's hilarious, and you're going to love her. But we'll let you know more about that date as soon as we get closer to it. Meanwhile, Susan Thrain has a word to say to you before I introduce Rosemary. So here's Susan.
Good morning. My name is Susan Tran, Director of Development here at Holly Hall. Thank you for joining us today as we kick off the book review season. Although we are meeting today virtually, we are so thankful that you've chosen to spend the morning with us as we raise funds for Holly Hall's Resident Subsidy Program. This program is a hallmark of Holly Hall's care and commitment to its residents as it covers the cost of care for residents who have outlived their retirement funds. It is our goal to ensure that no resident be turned away from their home or fear that they will not be cared for should this happen. Senior adults are living longer than was expected 60 years ago when they started to plan for retirement. In addition, healthcare expenses have seen large increases. Your ticket purchase and donations today will ensure that Holly Hall's residents have a peace of mind that they will be cared for regardless of their financial circumstance. Anytime throughout this presentation, you may text the word HOLLY to the number 74121. Thank you for your support and dedication to this lovely community. We appreciate each and every one of you. Enjoy the review.
Hi friends, back again, and what a delight to introduce to all of you today our faithful and favorite friend, Rosemary Rumbley. You know, when we changed our book reviews, we immediately thought, we have to have Rosemary, we can't live without her. She's so dear to us and can always get our first review off and running in high spirits. Not only is Rosemary an exceptionally personable person, she even has a doctorate in communications. She's known for being a speaker extraordinaire, but we also know her as a humorist, an actress, a historian, an author, a journalist, and the favorite tour guide in Dallas. Rosemary even gives lectures to seniors like us, saying it's a chance for folks to continue their education and to stimulate their minds. Oh, such a truly grand and generous mission for this generous lady. So today, we will have a chance now to listen to Rosemary stimulate our minds and hearts as we hear her review on the Roaring Twenties to kick off the new adventurous series for this year. Now please welcome our favorite friend, Rosemary Rumbley.
Hi, everybody down in Houston. I'm sorry I'm not there with all of my great friends, but we got to do with what we've got. And it's not a bad scene. Technology has led us to, well, to what we're doing right now. Now, unfortunately, when my son came over to set me up with Zoom, he didn't know how to make a better background for me. So you are seeing my refrigerator, the closet door of my hot water heater, and my sink. But that puts me in a very personable position to bring to you a marvelous book published by the New York Times titled The Roaring '20s. Now, it's a story of the 1920s and how they roared. Why would I select that book? Because 1920 and 2020, 100 years apart, had many things in common. Those 2 years, 1920, 2020, had a lot in common, even though there were 100 years in passing. Number one, 1920, the people in 1920 had just gotten over that Spanish flu epidemic. Spanish flu. Now we're in a pandemic, but that Spanish flu took millions and millions of lives. And in the middle of it all, the people in 1920, having gotten over this flu, were also fighting World War I. Now, I feel very connected to that 1918 flu for several reasons. Number one, my mother's brother, 18 years old, ready to go to World War I, died of the flu. And a new cemetery had to be opened in Dallas. They had so many deaths, they ran out of cemeteries. How grim is that? And my grandfather bought a whole plot of lots at Grove Hill Cemetery, and that's why my family's out at Grove Hill, because it was opened for that first grave, for that first death in the family, young man, my uncle, of that Spanish flu. So they were trying to get over that horrible flu epidemic, trying to get over World War I, and trying to get over the presidency of Woodrow Wilson in this manner. About 7 months before Woodrow Wilson finished his term, he had a massive stroke. He was totally unable to be president. But his wife, she didn't want to leave the White House, so she put him in seclusion and ran the country. This is Edith Wilson. And the country they were wanting to see the president. They needed encouragement. They needed to get over World War I. They needed to get over this flu. And they were suffering. They were suffering in 1920. Plus, they had some social issues as well. Number one, the passing of the 18th Amendment, which outlawed alcohol. No more bars, no more liquor stores. It was over. My mother always said, oh, we were so thrilled. Just think there will never be another drunk. Well, it didn't work out that way. The liquor industry went underground, and we'll get to Al Capone and his mob in just a minute, because they were a great part of the Roaring '20s. That's the 18th Amendment. Then they had the 19th Amendment. That was the one that gave women the right to vote. And all the suffragettes were cheering and walking the streets this time, not in protest, but in hallelujah, women can vote. So those were the social issues. Well, they had something else in common with us. It was an election year, 1920. And would you believe the campaign slogan in 1920 was "Back to normalcy. We want to be normal again, like it was." And so Warren G. Harding was elected, who was far from being normal. Now, he was a good-looking, tall, very dynamic speaker. He was everything a president should be, except he was a crook. No one knew it. He was elected, Warren G. Harding. He brought his cabinet in. His cabinet members were henchmen. They were seeing that no one would know that he was getting lots of money from Sinclair Oil. It was called the Teapot Dome oil scandal when that was all opened up and discovered that Warren G. Harding was the leader of the big scandal, oil scandal. He had children out of wedlock, unfaithful to, it was a mess. And he served 2 years when the Congress were going to impeach him. Now, he began to get worried, to say the least, when 2 of his cabinet members committed suicide. Now, that would tell you something, wouldn't it? Like, it looks like it's all over and we're not going to take the blame. So 2 of them killed themselves. And Warren G. Harding went up to Alaska for a little vacation, and they went up to tell him he was going to be impeached and discovered he was dead. What timing! He didn't face anything. No, he was dead. So the Roaring Twenties got a new president, and his name was Calvin Coolidge. Now, Calvin Coolidge was known as Silent Cal, never said much. And a lady came up to him at a party in the White House and said, "President Coolidge, I have a running bet that I can make you say 3 words this evening." And he turned to her and said, "You lose." Nary a word. Now, he was married to a charming lady named Grace. And the story goes that he and Grace were at a chicken farm. Presidents have to visit various places. You know, "President, would you come to see my chicken farm?" Sure, why not? So Calvin Coolidge and Grace Coolidge were at a chicken farm. And this chicken farmer turned to Calvin Coolidge and said, "See that rooster over there? He has sex 25 times a day." Calvin Coolidge said, "Go over there and tell Mrs. Coolidge that." Well, they did. And Mrs. Coolidge asked, "With 1 hen or 25? And the response, 25. And she said, "Go tell that to President Coolidge." They were a delightful couple. Stock market was up, up, up. And it was really a roaring time, stock market wise. And we'll get to other things, the way it roared. Lots of ways, the roaring 1920s. And things were good for the 1920s. And the Coolidges were planning to run again, but they had this son who loved to play tennis. They built him a tennis court there on the White House grounds. It's still there. And the son was playing tennis, rubbed a blister on his heel, it became infected and he died. And Grace said, no, no, we are not staying in this house. And the Coolidges left, and Herbert Hoover was elected. Still, all was going well. But October 1929, the end of the Roaring Twenties, the stock market crashed, and the country went into the deep, dark, what was known as the Depression, the Great Depression. But let's look at some of the Roaring Twenties and what really was going on. Now, I promised you that we would return to Al Capone and his men in Chicago. Now, in those days, criminals had personality. They were different. They were stars. They had names. Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, Big Al. See, personality. Today, anybody can be a criminal. But in those days, had to have personality. Remember Bonnie and Clyde? Oh, from Texas, actually from Dallas. Bonnie and Clyde. My mother and father were at a wedding, and the couple was leaving for the honeymoon. Bye. And someone said, oh my goodness, they look like Bonnie and Clyde. And my mother said that wasn't a compliment at all, because Bonnie and Clyde were ugly, low-down common trash. She was alarmed over that movie. They didn't look like Faye Dunaway and whoever, Beatty. No, they were ugly, low-down common trash. Now, my mother declared the worst thing you could ever be was common. I lived in the fear of being common all of my life. And my mother had levels of commonness. There was common, then there was common trash, and then there was low down common trash. And Bonnie and Clyde were ugly, low down common trash. Now, other criminals had just as much personality and sparkle, more or less. But Big Al, see, he was paying off the FBI. Oh, it was bad. Al Capone was running things. He was running the whole scene. Paid off that FBI. Powers that be said, we got to get a new chief. We've got, oh, this is terrible. We got to get rid. We've got to have a head of the FBI that is, and the book declared him squeaky clean. He's got to be so squeaky clean. And they found a squeaky clean leader. And his name was Elliot Ness. And his men were so squeaky clean, they were known as the Untouchables. So that television series was very accurate in its description of Elliot Ness and Big Al and the mob and all of those criminals, well-known criminals with cutesy names. Now, speaking of criminals in Dallas, now I'm sure you had a share of criminals in Houston. I'm just familiar with one particular criminal of the 20s in Dallas because my father spoke of him often. His name was Dagger Pruitt. He would stop a car at a red light, or rather a car would stop at a red light. Dagger would rush up, open the driver's door, and plunge a dagger into the side of the driver. Kill him. Leave the dagger there. See, that's why he was known as Dagger Pruitt. My daddy told the story of driving home one evening. My mother had asked him to stop at the store, pick up some things. Okay. He had his grocery sack sitting in the passenger seat, stopped for a red light, and when he did, the grocery sack tilted over and a can of peas plunged into my father's side. And he said, I'll never forget it. I thought, Dagger's got me for sure. Dagger Pruitt. He was arrested. He's in jail, and he dresses up, tie and shirt and coat and tie. And he was known as the best dressed man in prison until his execution. They were all executed. Oh, mercy. All these colorful criminals. Big Al finally, oh yes, he was executed eventually. No, I think before he was executed, he died of sickness. I didn't bother. I just know Big Al ruled, and he ended. Thank you, Elliot Ness. Now, what were people doing in the 20s? Did they have iPads, iPhones, social media? Of course they didn't. They had a new invention though. Oh, it was new. It was marvelous. It was called radio. Now the radio began in 1906 with a gentleman by the name of Reginald Fessenden. Reginald Fessenden worked with Edison in his lab, and he had his own lab in Brant Rock, Massachusetts. And see, Marconi had invented the wireless after Samuel Morse stretched the wires. I've got to answer the phone. I'll tell him. See, I don't know how to mute my phone. Hang on. Hello? Forget it. I'll call you back. Where were we? We were with Samuel Morse. Samuel Morse was a portrait painter. And he went to the Louvre to study. And no one paid much attention to him. And he thought he was great. So he gave up portrait painting and actually sat down and invented the telegraph with the Morse code, and stretched the wires. When he returned from Paris and came to Washington, he stretched the wires from Congress to Baltimore, Maryland, and sent a message. Morse code. That's Samuel Morse. Marconi wireless. Now, in 1906, Reginald Fessenden in Brant Rock, Massachusetts, invented a microphone he claimed would transmit the human voice. Oh, what an invention. So on Christmas Eve, 1906, Brant Rock, Massachusetts, Reginald Fessenden spoke in his mic, "Merry Christmas. My wife will now play a violin solo." Now, if you heard that, write to me, Reginald Fessenden, Brant Rock, Massachusetts. Well, a sailor was on a ship docked in Newfoundland. He's listening to and all of a sudden he hears, "Merry Christmas. My wife will now play a violin solo. Send me a message if you heard all of this." Brant Rock, Massachusetts. The sailor responded, and the radio was born. But see, it took a long time to create a commercial radio station. People were sending messages, radio messages, voice, human voice, but a studio with a call letters and all that, that didn't come until 1920 with KDKA, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's still in existence. It's a news and sports station, first commercial radio station in America, KDKA. And in Dallas, Texas, next year, the second commercial radio station is celebrating 100 years, 1921. It's WRR. Now, where they got the call letters, they don't even know. Someone said because the transmitter was up on top of Flagpole Hill at White Rock Lake, so it says White Rock Radio, WRR. Or they broadcast, and someone in Rockwall, Texas heard them, said, "We heard you. We reach Rockwall." We don't know, but the call letters are WRR, second commercial radio station in America. And then the radio came to be in a big way. But see, no matter where they went, that transmitter had to go with them. They couldn't broadcast without that transmitter by their side. So consequently, the big thing on radio, sports-wise, was boxing. They could take that transmitter to ringside. And that's why anybody my age grew up knowing Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, Max Baer, Joe Louis. See, because those boxing matches were all on the radio. But the favorite game was baseball. Well, we can't take a transmitter out to the field. So this is why Ronald Reagan became so famous. He had such an imagination as a young man. He's in a studio, in a room, all by himself with a microphone, miles away from the baseball field, and they would wire to him what was happening at the baseball game, and he'd make it up like he made the story, told the story like he was there. "I'm here at the field, oh, the sun is shining, da, 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 da." He's up at bat, he's leaning down, da, da, da. And he was so imaginative and so exciting. He became the greatest sports announcer and then a movie star, Ronald Reagan. We'll get to sports in just a minute, but let's stop a minute and look at another invention that came just in time for the 1920s. See, there was vaudeville, musicals. The great musicals of the time. Ziegfeld. Ziegfeld had 3 shows on Broadway. He had the Ziegfeld Follies. He had a show titled Showboat. Oh, Jerome Kern, Oscar Hammerstein. Oh, marvelous musical. And Hammerstein's favorite song was one that dealt with the river. And the people that were putting money into the show, Showboat, they said, "We want that song taken out. We don't like it. Old Man River. Nah, we don't like it." And Hammerstein said, "Listen, this show's about a river. We're on the river. It's a showboat. And this is the only connection we have with the river is this song. All right, leave it in." And of course it became so beloved. Old Man River, that old man river. Oh, hit show. And then the other one, the third one rather, was Rio Rita, life is sweeter, Rita, when you are near. That's called operetta. Oh, the operetta. Those 3 played on Broadway, along with another musical that I will mention eventually again. I'll mention this musical. Tea for Two. No, Nanette. Picture you upon my knee, just tea for 2 and 2 for tea. No, Nanette. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. Well, my phone, hello, I cannot talk. Please call me back. We'll leave that in, that's okay. Tea for 2, anybody that does any soft shoe, we'll get back to it, see. But we have another invention, and this is the moving pictures. Now, here's how it all started. a man by the name of Leland Stanford. Now that's Stanford University, Stanford Railroad, Stanford, money, money. And he had a whole horse farm filled with race horses, and he loved them. Oh, he'd say, run my horses for me. Keep my horses running. Oh, I want to watch them. And he'd go out to his farm and watch his horses run. And he said, those horses are so fast. They're running so fast. Their hooves are off the ground. Look, they're up. They're floating. Oh, they can't be. Yes, they are. And I'm going to prove it. I'm going to hire a photographer. And he gets this photographer by the name of Edward Muybridge, 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 Edward Muybridge. And Mr. Muybridge, photographer, went out, took pictures of the horses running, and he took a series of pictures. Picture, and he has a whole line of running horses. He glues them on a large cardboard cylinder, turns the cylinder around and around, and those horses move, and they are off the ground. Leland Stanford has parties. Oh, come look at my moving pictures of my horses. They're off the ground. Well, the word got to a vicious man. He did give us the light bulb, the phonograph. His name was Thomas Edison. He's in Menlo Park, New Jersey at his lab. There's a guy named Muybridge that has invented, by accident, moving pictures. Oh, okay. Tell him to come visit me. I want to meet him. So, Muybridge visits Edison. How did you do? How did you do? What did you tell me? And he did, and Edison rushed out, got the patent, and always gets the credit for moving pictures. And poor old Muybridge, I will throw this in. If you read his whole life story, he got back to California. His wife was having an affair, and he shot the guy and killed him dead and got off no murder because he was protecting his property, his wife. I love that. That's been used in a lot of cases where you shoot the lover and get off free. Well, meanwhile, back to moving pictures. Now, they called them moving pictures. Oh, and Edison made the first one. See, he gets the credit. And he had something else that happened to him. Edison did. In that celluloid was invented. So he didn't have a cardboard cylinder. He had a reel of pictures. See, that just worked out so well for him. And that first moving picture is in the Smithsonian. They used to show it occasionally, and now you can see it immediately. Don't get out your phone yet. Don't cut me off. But later, Google in YouTube, Mr. Ott's sneeze. Edison got this man named Mr. Ott and said, I'm going to take a movie of you, a moving picture of you, sneeze. And Mr. Ott, that's it. That's the whole movie. You can Google it and they'll show Mr. Ott sneeze. The very first moving picture. Now, in the 20s, the language changed and moving pictures. See, that's why that song in the 20s, you ought to be in pictures, you're wonderful to see, turned into movies. Because in the 20s, everything became IES. We're in the 20s, IES. Moving pictures becomes movies. If you're a lady and you wear underclothes, you're wearing panties. And if you're eating wheat cereal, you're eating Wheaties. Everything's IES somehow. That's what they liked in the 20s. So the movies, and they didn't talk. No, they didn't speak. So all these famous mimes became even more famous because they didn't speak, but they could act. And that was Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle. Oh, my mother said we loved Fatty Arbuckle. He got involved with a young girl and they threw him out of Hollywood because he was a disgrace. Such action. Oh, we don't take any immoral acts in Hollywood. Hollywood, yeah, why Hollywood? Well, Edison made everybody that made a movie, if you created a moving picture, you had to pay Edison. And people were tired of that were making moving pictures. They said, we got to get away from this guy. We're here in New Jersey. Let's get out of town. Let's go to Southern California and go to a little town that's named after a tree that has berries on it. It's called a Hollywood tree. They grew plentifully. Lots of Hollywoods there in Hollywood. So that's where they went to avoid Edison. So the moving picture, silent films, silent. Now see, the talkies, as they called them, they came in the 30s, but the 20s they went from vaudeville to moving pictures because moving pictures were introduced in vaudeville shows. They'd have a vaudeville act, tap dance and all that. And then they'd say, and now we're going to show you a little moving picture. And everybody said, cut out the tap dancer. Let's have more of the moving pictures. They were fascinated by it. So vaudeville died and moving pictures came to be all during the roaring 20s. Now let's go back to baseball. But this is after they could move the transmitter. I wrote the history of the Lakewood Country Club here in Dallas when it was 100 years old. And I discovered a picture, a radio broadcast, a picture of a radio broadcast in the beginning of radio. And they had to have that transmitter. And the picture was of the golfer, and he had his club, ta-da! And the announcer had his microphone, and this poor man had a transmitter strapped to his back, and he had to walk all 18 holes, to broadcast that golf game. So radio was serving its time with sports, but the big sports figure came with a young boy who was deserted by his family. Father and mother couldn't take care of him. Dumped him at a Catholic boys' home. His name was George Herman Ruth. And a priest took an interest in him. And poor George Herman Ruth was such a big kid. He was too big. You can be too little, but you can be too big. He was too big. Kids made fun of him. It was really a sad scene. But this priest never deserted him, stayed with him, and taught him how to play baseball, and eventually got him into the Boston Red Sox team. And he won every game for the Red Sox. But here was the snag. The owner of the Red Sox team, his name was Jacob Freeze, he wanted to invest in a musical named No No Nanette. I told you I'd get back to it. He wanted to invest in that musical. He didn't have the money, so he sold George Herman Ruth to the New York Yankees, and they never lost a game. The Babe Ruth, ruled, the country. Now, my mother was born in Dallas, Texas in 1894. My grandfather was a German immigrant who came to Dallas in 1884 and opened a bakery because he was a German. My mother always said, now in the early days of Dallas, All the Greeks had restaurants. All the Italians had grocery stores. All the Germans had bakeries. All the Irish had saloons. And the Jewish folk owned everything else. In Dallas, we had these Jewish merchants that came in the late 1890s. Why they came to Dallas, we don't know. But they built these magnificent stores. Neiman, Marcus, Tite, Getty, all these big stores. So my mother, being reared downtown at the bakery, knew all the Jewish people. She knew all the Italians. She knew all the Irish. She knew everybody in town. And she could do the dialects, which was so funny. You know, she could talk like they did with their dialects. And she said she was in Woolworth, the dime store in Dallas, and with a Jewish grandmother. See, then they had a distinctive Jewish accent. And this Jewish grandmother was there with her little Jewish grandson. And the little grandson wanted a baseball and a baseball bat. And that Jewish grandmother says, "What are you running that for? You're thinking maybe you're Babe Ruth?" My mother got so tickled. And that became a statement at our house. Anytime somebody was asking for something outlandish, my mother would say, "What are you running that for? You're thinking maybe you're Babe Ruth?" But that's how great he was, the Babe. Now let's see, we've discussed show business and radio and movies. Let's look at the writers. The writers. All those great literary giants. See, that would be Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Kaufman and Hart. Now, stopping a moment with Kaufman and Hart, the Broadway shows primarily were written by Hammerstein and Jerome Kern, and a little of Irving Berlin, of course, quite a bit of Irving Berlin. Those were the musicals on Broadway. But the plays were written by Kaufman and Hart, George Kaufman and Moss Hart. Do you remember Kitty, well, in What's My Line? She was married to Moss Hart. Kitty Callan. She was married to Moss Hart, and he was still writing. Now, they wrote all those great shows, those comedies for Broadway, then some were made into movies, and some came to little theaters. Little theaters were born during the 20s. See, not everybody could go to New York. You could go to your little theater, and they wrote George Washington Slept Here, Merrily We Roll Along, The Man Who Came to Dinner. See, all of those great shows of the 1930s, because 1920s, because Broadway was flourishing, musicals and plays. Now, all of these authors would gather at noontime in New York at the Algonquin Hotel. Now, that's just off Times Square. Old hotel. I always loved when I used to go to New York to see shows. I would go to the Algonquin just to see the round table, and they've still got that round table there where all those writers would eat together at lunch. They have a cat at the Algonquin, Matilda. And the last time I was at the Algonquin, that cat was there on its little bed there by the door. And I asked the doorman, I said, "Does that cat ever leave?" He turned to me and said, "Would you?" No, I would stay at the Algonquin. And that's what they did for hours, and talk and share these writers. Now, the woman in the midst of it all was Dorothy Parker. Dorothy Parker. So clever. Now, when this pandemic hit, I didn't make it. I was not giving any book reviews. No one was gathering. And I had a lot of calls. People called, "What are you doing? You're not out speaking. What are you doing?" And I would respond, "Well, I'm talking to myself." Now, I must give the great Dorothy Parker credit for this, but I wish I had said it. Dorothy Parker said, "Of course I talk to myself. I appreciate a great speaker as an intelligent audience." So Dorothy Parker will always be in our memories as well. These great writers. Transportation became, everybody could own an automobile because Henry Ford made certain we all got a cheap car, creating what he called the assembly line. And everybody could afford a Model T, a Model A. They make it whatever color you want to make them, but make them all black. That's what Henry Ford had to say about his cars. So that was the transportation. Trolleys, of course, the train was there. The airplane, see, that all rested on the shoulders of a young man who was actually a mailman. His name was Charles Lindbergh. He flew the mail. He was a mailman. He was hired by the post office to fly letters. And this gentleman offered this great reward if you could fly from the United States to Paris, from North America to Paris. And Lindbergh took him up on it. "Yeah, I'll try." And his getting into that plane with his little food, his little water, no weight. Let's keep the weight down, because I've got a long flight, see. 37 hours. 37 hours across the Atlantic and landing in Paris. What a man, Charles Lindbergh. Of course, he fell from grace. Oh my goodness, yes. Because in 1939, he was living in Europe and said, "Oh, Adolf Hitler is a fine man." Well, so much for Charles Lindbergh. And one of the streets in Dallas was named Lindbergh Boulevard. And I remember in 1939, the name was changed to Skillman Avenue because Lindbergh fell out of favor. So we have transportation, we have marvelous literature, we have moving pictures, we have the radio, of course, and Broadway, crooks, criminals. Oh, bathtub brew. I do want to tell a story about my father and the bathtub brew. See, you couldn't buy alcohol unless you had a bootlegger, right? Yeah. And this man next door to my parents, this family next door to my parents, their name was Andrews. And Mr. Andrews made beer and gave my daddy a bottle. And my mother was just alarmed. She said, "Oh, you're not going to drink that beer?" "No, I'm not." "Why, what does Mr. Andrews know about making beer?" "No, it's poison." My daddy said, "I agree." Now, they lived in a section in Dallas. Today, it's known as Lower Greenville, but at that time, it was just known as Greenville Avenue. And that's where they lived. And the people there in that area had been complaining about the sewage line. It was not running properly. Well, my daddy poured Mr. Andrews' beer in the sink, down the drain, and unstopped the sewage in that area. My mother said everybody was just, "Oh, we're not having trouble with our sewage." And Mother said it was Mr. Andrews' beer. It cleaned out the sewer for sure. So bathtub brew, Al Capone, what all have we talked about? Broadway itself. Oh my gracious. They were all roaring 20s Now, here we are in 2020. Many people are saying we're going to forget this year. We're just going to wipe it away. Well, I tell you what we've learned in the year 2020 for sure. We've learned one great lesson, and that is to live one day at a time. I gave a speech March 13th, and it was at a country club. Everybody was there having fun, eating, listening to me. Glorious time. March 13th. March 14th, I was to be at a church that evening. In one day. Church was closed and the entire nation was shut. In one day. So I thought, you never know what's going to happen. And so you live one day at a time and praise that day, because that's all you've got. And I am so thrilled that I spent this day in September with you, not in person, but with some new technology known as Zooming. So I hope you take all of this fun and knowledge that we've discussed in these moments together. I hope you take it, live with it, love it, remember it, sing. Go out and sing Tea for Two for sure. Old Man River. Celebrate. Celebrate today. I'm glad I was with you. Bye.